This podcast is made for fun and is not subsidized. Hello and welcome to Orinda Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi. I'm your host Orinda, and today we are talking about Doctor Who with Jonathan Ford. Doctor Who is a British sci-fi television program broadcast since 1963. The program depicts the adventures of a Time Lord called the Doctor. The Doctor explores the universe in a time-traveling spaceship called the TARDIS. Its exterior appears as a blue British police box, which was a common sight in Britain in 1963. With various companions, the Doctor combats foes, works to save civilizations, and help people in need. Personally, I don't have much with Doctor Who. And maybe that is really weird because I do like sci-fi. Perhaps it has to do something with the time traveling or just how it is set up. Although because of this episode I dived into the world of Doctor Who, and I must say it's a fresh breath to watch something new and totally different sci-fi what I normally watch. Our guest today is Jonathan Ford. He works for the NHS for many years. He has a passion for fantasy and sci-fi. Hello, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Miranda, and thank you for having me here to talk about my interest in Doctor Who, which I have been for many years, which I have had an interest rather for many years. I became a fan probably in my early teens or even before. So yes, it's...
I guess that's a long time.
Yes.
So how have you become interested in Doctor Who?
Well, I think it was probably because it was a fairly... in the days when I was watching, it was probably firstly in the John Pertwee era. That's when I really remember things. And... during that time, it was, and before and after, a fairly family-friendly show. I remember us all watching it together, myself and my family. So there was nothing to really object about it, which was a good thing. And also, it was just... interesting. You'd end up in a different environment every week, and it was generally you could go anywhere. So that was the key. You could go anywhere and do anything if you had a TARDIS. Yeah.
Was this also the program that you become loved of in like sci-fi, or did you had other programs as well?
Yeah. Well, that was the main one probably, but I have other interests in programs, and you may or may not have heard of these. I can name a few. Blake 7 was another favorite program. Sapphire and Steel. There was The Tomorrow People, which was a tea time favorite in the weekdays. And in the early, probably in the 70s, the BBC had a number of fantasy programs on as well, which were of that ilk as well. I can't necessarily remember all the names, but I think that what I'm going to remember was actually ITV, and it was a program called Sky. It was 1975, and it was about a boy called Sky. So it was all kind of floating around there, but I suppose that Doctor Who was the main one, yes.
Okay. What do you like so much about Doctor Who?
Again, I said it's a family-friendly thing, really, and yes, it's a fairly moral program. The good guys generally win. Yes, and it's also a social history bit as well. Particularly, I'm thinking of an episode of Doctor Who called Remembrance of the Daleks, and that was featuring Sylvester McCoy as the Doctor. And that contains lots of adventure and special effects, etc., etc., but also some nice social points. There was, for instance, in the window of the guest house that Ace was staying in now in that period, there was a sign which in the window which said no colours, which obviously wouldn't be acceptable today, but was obviously a sign of the times in those days when programmed. So yes, it's and also in that particular episode as well, there's a speech held in a cafe about sugar. It's quite a well-known speech, and we delve into slavery a bit there, and yes, so it's got a bit of everything in it, I think.
Okay. If we were talking about you being a Doctor Who fan, how big are you a fan of Doctor Who? Like, are you collecting things? Are you going to conventions?
I have collecting things. I haven't got a huge collection of models, but I've got some models. My favourite of which is a bust of a Cyberman taken from the story Earthshock, and that was my favourite Cyberman design or evolution or whatever you can say. Also, my favourite model, which I have, which I actually got at the Doctor Who experience, which was put on in Cardiff over a period of 5 years, and it was an experience, an interactive experience, and also it was a 2 floors of exhibitions and exhibits from the show, models and characters. So that was good, yes, and I have been through that experience and through friends of mine coming there and people coming to visit who are now friends. I have made a lot of friends through that place, and indeed I now know a lot of people that have been to the Netherlands, which
I am from.
Well, yes, indeed, which I know a lot of people from now, and I've been there through my Doctor Who connections as well. Regularly, I've been to an event called The Capital, which has been held at Gatwick for many years. That's to do with the Doctor Who Appreciation Society. But we've had a bit of a dry period there because of the pandemic. I do enjoy going to that, and the event has been rescheduled for 2022, so we hope that goes ahead.
Yeah, I can agree to you with that, with about finding friends all over the world when you are being a total geek fan with that.
Right.
I have it with Star Trek a lot, and I always say and find its experience itself, it's that there is some kind of an atmosphere at those events, and everybody is treating you like equal, and everyone it's not stupid or whatever when you are being in cosplay and dress yourself up for just, for example, only Doctor Who or Star Trek or whatever. And
yes, that's right.
And it is very nice to meet people all over the world on an event like that, and make new friends, of course, and of course friends from online that you never met but meet on an event like that. That's awesome.
Yes, that's very true. And you've got a common interest as well. You can say immediately what you do think about either naming an episode. Many people would be able to do, or people may say to things like, "What was the episode called? This was it, or that was it." And so, yes, it's great that almost immediately you can enter into a conversation with people who have a common interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any favorite doctor, and which one and why?
Yes, I have a favorite doctor. Probably John Pertwee was my favorite. Growing up, he was kind of my doctor, as I put it. But my favorite stories, perhaps differently, oddly enough, and of course Tom Baker, who ran it, who was the longest serving doctor, I believe. There's a few adventures there, of course, but those that stick out in my mind, in fact, Tom Baker adventure would be the Robots of Death, which was a whodunit themed episode, but with robots. And that was an interesting episode, and I thought the design of those particular robots were very good. Then, of course, as I mentioned, Remembrance of the Daleks, for its adventure and really a bit of everything. So yeah, and that was with Sylvester McCoy. And I do also like a couple, one particularly with, The Curse of Fenwick is also a good one that I like. Well, that was with, yes, why is that escaping me now? But someone will tell me. Oh yes, with the so all spanning, throughout the ages and the incarnations of Doctor Who, classic, as what I would call it, when before we had a break and before the what I would call it New Who came along. I actually work in a hospital, and the underground tunnels that are in that hospital were used for the first episode of the new, what I call New Who, which was an episode entitled Rose, and I can say that I know those tunnels and things like that, which was nice. And Cardiff, of course, which I live in, is where it all was all filmed. So it's nice to point out things, landmarks, be able to identify landmarks and everything, which was featured in the program.
Yeah, I think that's in one way it must be weird because you know that they recorded there and or filmed it there, but yeah, it's in one way it's also nice to know, and I think if people are really interested in that, then you have a nice story to tell.
Yes. That's right. Yes. Yeah.
If you could change something in the concept of Doctor Who, what would you like to change as a fan?
What would I like to change? I'd have liked, I think, it was a bit. We had when Colin Baker was doing the program, and who I met, Colin Baker actually, Incidentally, but I also met and had a picture with the current Doctor, Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster, sorry, I mean Jodie Whittaker. Sorry about that. No, but yeah, Colin Baker, his tenure at cut off a bit. I've been listening to an interview of his, and basically they just wanted to replace the Doctor because I think they didn't think that his character or his persona was going down too well, and so I liked him to being able to carry on. And in fact, in the first episode of Sylvester McCoy, whose name I now remember for being in the Curse of Fenric, that was an episode that I enjoyed from his tenure. But Colin Baker wasn't actually there for the regeneration scene, so I'd have liked Colin Baker to have had a bit longer. Incidentally, for anybody who's interested, he's now recording for Big Finish, which is the audio ventures, in which he is able to complete his developmental arc, as he quotes in the interview. So that period, I'd liked it to have carried on. Obviously, the show was cancelled for a bit and then came back in its new form with what I call New Who. So yeah, but so I would have liked that period to have not happened, really, of course. But the New Who I quite enjoyed some of that as well. I still think actually my favourite episode from what I would call New Who is an episode entitled Dalek, and it's just basically featuring one Dalek and exploring the personality or whatever, so which is good. So that's nice, but I'd have liked to have a bit more Colin Baker on the TV.
Yeah, I read a lot of things about the last Doctor, Jodie. How are Doctor Who fans looking at her now? Because I knew there were a lot of negative reaction on that Doctor Who was going to be a female.
Oh, right, yes. I wasn't particularly one of those. I would say that it was a surprise, but no, I would say on reflection and having met her as well, she seems really nice, really chatty. But in the show as well, I think her and the team work her on screen family, as it were, assistants, followers, friends, whatever you'd like to say. That team really works well. Yes, I've enjoyed it actually, and an interesting point that about it was, in fact, my mother mentioned it first episode of the new one, where one of the characters was having trouble riding a bike, and apparently it's revealed as well throughout the series that he has a condition called dyspraxia, which is apparently a condition to do with lack of coordination. And indeed, so my mother said, "Oh, did you pick that up?" I said, "No, apparently I have it as well, but I just didn't know what it was called." So that was an interesting point about all that as well. So yes, but no, I enjoyed her tenure as Doctor, which I believe is coming or has come to an end, and I think, are now only going to see her in another couple of stories, from what I hear, and then somebody else step into her shoes. So who knows?
Okay. Well, let's talk about the friends of Doctor Who and the enemies of Doctor Who. Tell me what in what contest do you like about them and what not, and yeah, just let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, well, I say if I go with favorites and things like that, I'll say that. Okay, well, I'll say probably my favorite enemy of Doctor Who, if you like, is the Cybermen. I suppose I have a particular interest in them because very many years ago, I got a collection of Doctor Who audio cassettes. So you could tell how long ago that was. And that was a history of the Cybermen read by David Banks, who played the cyber leader in many of the stories. And he was narrating a kind of history of them, a kind of archive history. And he presented them as people as men and women who wanted to survive. And so they ended up developing spare parts. And interestingly enough, one of the only Doctor Who audio adventure that I have is one called Spare Parts, which is really good. Made me cry at the end. So, yeah. And so they were, I think, only trying to preserve their life in the beginning, but ended up trying to take over the world. So, yeah. But there were many others of Doctors. The Daleks, of course. I'm looking at a few Daleks now.
Of course.
And I tell you what else I'm looking at, because then you can. So I'm also looking at something called a Wirrn, which was a monster only appeared once, as far as I'm aware, in an episode called The Ark in Space, and that was an episode of Tom Baker when they were on a space station. So that was interesting. I'm looking at a Croton, which was an episode called The Crotons, which was Patrick Troughton was only the second Doctor Who, and that was a favourite adventure of mine of his era. I'm also incidentally looking at Bessie, which was the roadster car driven by John Pertwee in his tenure show. Enemy-wise, who can forget the Master in a actual person, played by a couple of characters over the years, Roger Delgado and Anthony Ainley, and a few others more recently. But yeah, this is good to have a balance of good and evil. And as I say, it's usually the case that everybody comes out all right. We've had a few characters who've come to a sticky end, unfortunately, but that's life, as they say. Yeah.
What I'm wondering now is, do you see any difference in the Doctor Who series from the old days and now?
Yes, I think probably it's evolved with, and now we're seeing probably more up-to-date things, like more up-to-date special effects. And there's a comparison actually in the Five Doctors, which was an anniversary story. It's actually got it on the DVD, there's an effect, a new effect that they've done for the new era anyway, and the old effect, and I must say that I prefer the old. But yeah, yes. So you got some more special effects and everything, and they're obviously these days as well. They're trying to make the show, I think, more inclusive, more reflective of the various apparent genders that we have nowadays, the variety of of that kind of thing, and it's getting to be even more kind of environmentally aware as well, with messages about that from recent series about pollution and all of that, which it has. So it's become more that way, I think. I think in the old days, I think it was all adventure and kind of good against evil, which was presented in the form of a monster, a bad thing, a bad man, a bad behavior. There have been some that have reflected on the issue of nuclear power in the past as well, which is good. But I think even more these days, it's becoming more inclusive and aware of everybody around, aware of protecting the environment around us. So it's always been a show which is told, which has had a message, but I think which has been, I suppose, relevant to the people at the time. So it's continuing without it.
Well, my last question for you is, do you have any favorite episodes people need to watch? And in which Doctor Who is it?
Well, yeah, as I say, as I've mentioned a few times now, Remembrance of the Daleks is a good one for various points of view. That's got action, adventure, and also a bit of a moral story. And another favourite of mine would, as I say, be the Robots of Death, for the reasons I've mentioned before. I think that if any of the Tom Baker would be a good place to start, I think. But I think if you want a general introduction, I think, as I've said to you and people before who've asked, I say that the Remembrance of the Daleks is one for having a bit of everything in it. Another of my favourites, because it's based on the model that I have, is the Cyberman story that I mentioned. The Earth Shock. Sorry, temporarily forgot then. I do like my Earth Shock Cyberman bus, and it's a bit sad at the end, but I won't spoil it by telling everyone what happens. But that would also be a good one, I think, to watch as well. And of course, the genesis of the Daleks, where we first see the Daleks being created, is another good one. It presents us with a very moral dilemma in where the Doctor has an opportunity to destroy, to prevent, or to modify the creation of the Daleks. So all that is very good, particularly as the Daleks have had such a long lifespan, and so that would be another key one, I think, for people to watch.
Yeah, I think the Daleks is always coming back in every series of the Doctor Who.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that I watched the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th Doctor, and I always, it's I have, before this episode, I rewatched it again, and I must say it's a little bit fresh bread for. It's very different to the sci-fi I always watch. So
Right, yes.
so it's nice to become acquainted with it again, and now I can see the fun part of it.
Good. Well, that's great. Yes. That's good.
So, well, thank you, Jonathan, for being my guest today, and I hope we can talk to you again in another episode. In the next episode, we will talk about Harry Potter. Let me know what you think of this episode, or if you'd like to comment, you can do that on the podcast hosting site Podbean and Google Podcast, on the Facebook group, the Discord server, and YouTube channel of Orinda Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, and of course on Twitter at OTFASP. I am Orinda, and thank you for listening to Orinda Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi. See you next time.